colleagues, good morning, good afternoon. We hope that you and your families are all well. On behalf of PULSAR and FinCoP teams, we are happy to welcome you to our 10th PULSAR webinar entitled First Time IPSAS Adoption, Lesson Learned. The key objective of this smart interactive talk are present the key findings of the most recent PULSAR FinCoP knowledge product, first time adoption of accrual-based IPSAS, discuss the common challenges and lesson learned associated with the first time IPSAS implementation, and share relevant country experiences of IPSAS implementation journey. In order to achieve the proposed objective, we have a tight agenda and a group of renowned experts on the topic. I would like to remind you that all presentations, including their translation, will be briefly available on our PULSAR website, while the original version in English should be already available directly in Kudo platform, accessible from the right middle side of your screen. Please also feel free to post any question you might have using your preferred language directly in our chat. Without further ado, and on behalf of Dan Boyce, who unfortunately was not feeling well today and will not be able to join us, I pass the floor to Armand Batian, Lead Financial Management Specialist and PULSAR Manager, and then to Xiomara Morel, Practice Manager of the Governance Team for the Latin American Caribbean region, to share with us some opening remarks. Armand, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dimitri. Good afternoon, good morning, dear colleagues, participants, speakers. On behalf of the WorldBank, PULSAR, and FinCoP teams, it's my pleasure to welcome you on our 10th PULSAR virtual workshop, as we also call it Smart Interactive Talk. This is also the 4th event that is jointly organized by PULSAR and FinCoP, and we are glad to see that this continued cross-collaboration between both families, which we think has been very productive and will continue fostering. Governments are entrusted to manage public resources and deliver a wide range of public services in a sound, cost-effective, and sustainable manner. In parallel, many countries still face significant challenges in the quality of financial reporting, including its consistency and comparability. The implementation of public sector accounting reform based on the robust set of international standards for public sector, as well as good international practices such as IPSAS, represent an opportunity for governments to not only improve the quality and reliability of their public financial information that could be used for decision making, but also to assess the financial position, performance, and cash flow of the governments, promote consistency and further comparability with peers at both regional and global levels, and strengthen public investment planning, as it's discussed nowadays quite actively, and state assets management, as well as achieve greater level of fiscal transparency and accountability to citizens. This new paper, which Dmitry was referring to, represent a natural continuation of one of the first PULSAR knowledge products, which many of you probably know. It's Good Practice Template to PSA Reform Roadmap, which was published in 2018 and is available on PULSAR website. In parallel, IPSAS implementation reforms, as any other public financial management reforms, possess a number of challenges, which vary from a lack of political support and resources to adequately implement and support reform management and coordination. Many of these challenges might be avoided by taking into consideration good international practice and lessons learned. Thus, as Dmitry just mentioned, one of the main objectives of this event is to share with all of you the key lessons learned from a number of IPSAS implementation, as well as on the PSA reforms that took place all around the world. We would want to just thank you for everyone for allocating your time and in your busy schedule and to attend this event, and hope that your families are doing well during these difficult times. We hope you will enjoy this event, and we are looking forward to seeing you in the next PULSAR webinar. And of course, it's very pleased to see all our distinguished partners and speakers to join this event. Dmitry, back to you for further proceedings. Thanks.
Thank you, Armand. Xiomara.
Good afternoon to all of you in Europe and other parts of the world, and good morning to those of us in Latin America. It is really a pleasure and an honor to participate in this fourth event with PULSAR and FOCAL members jointly together to share knowledge and lessons learned on the implementation of IPSAS for the first time. My sincere appreciation to the organizing team for this invitation and for bringing all of us together as a family. I do feel at home. We see in so many faces of those of you that have really supported the implementation of IPSAS in Latin America and Caribbean, and that have worked with the bank in many events and knowledge exchanges in the past. It is really an honor to have you continuing with us on this road to help our countries and clients to implement accrual accounting and IPSAS. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome Juan Torres. Juan is the General Accountant General of Mexico. He assumed the presidency of FOCAL recently in May 2021, this year, and we wish him great success during his tenure as FOCAL president and reiterate to Juan and the FOCAL members that the bank will continue our engagement and partnership with FOCAL in support of the IPSAS implementation and beyond. As highlighted by Arman, there are many challenges that countries that really go through in implementing accrual accounting and IPSAS. And there are many I would say challenges that cannot be overcome if there is actually a political commitment in the country, if there is actually an implementation plan to do a phased approach for IPSAS implementation, and if we continue to exchange knowledge not only in the region that the countries are, but also across the Atlantic, across regions, and learn from experience of other colleagues in other countries. I would like to actually introduce here that because of the time constraint, only Peru will be showcased on this presentation, but there are many other lessons that can be learned from other countries and economies in Latin America, as you all know, and our distinguished panelists know, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and so on. So I will not go into the details of any of them, but I would like to make just a few remarks. In the case of the Peru was one of the first countries that decided to adopt IPSAS, and I know for sure that Oscar will actually in his presentation mention what are the challenges and how they overcome those. Peru decided to do an IPSAS in direct adoption when they decided to do that. Most countries after that, even though they have actually started a process of accrual accounting back in, let's say, before the 2010, and some of them, like Colombia and others, actually started to make changes on their framework in 2007 and after that, many countries in the region are actually adopting IPSAS indirectly. And the reason for that is because precisely every country has their own regulations, they have their own Congress or parliament that actually in some way have to approve laws, etc. So in many countries, IPSAS has been in the bark to be implemented indirectly. Let me just mention just a few highlights of these 3 countries or 4 countries that I just mentioned. They all have an implementation plan. This implementation plan was a phased approach. In the case of Brazil adopted and decided to implement IPSAS, having the national implementation plan for a gradual implementation of IPSAS from 2015 to 2024. So based on that plan, Brazil is still going through that roadmap to implement IPSAS, and a lot of challenges has been actually showcased in some of the other events that we had in the region. Maybe not so much in Europe, but I know that some of my colleagues present here knows about the challenges on Brazil. Beyond Brazil, we also have Chile and Colombia, who actually decided to have also implementation plans. There were a lot of exchanges with many other countries in the region before Chile decided in 2015 to adopt IPSAS to an indirect adoption approach. In the case of Colombia, as I said before, in 2007, Colombia actually has adopted accrual accounting, and in 2013, Colombia laid out a plan for converging to IPSAS in the case that they will implement centrally and subnational at the same time. However, as you all know, that is actually an ambitious plan. And I know that there are a lot of challenges at subnational level for the quality of the information, as it happens in many, many countries. But all of that, all in all, these four countries have in common the political will, a reform plan that encompasses not just the public, but the private sector also, with IFRS implementation. And at the same time, they have technical people that are willing and put the time and the behavior to make changes in their institutions. So I wanted really to recognize that it's not the same in every country, in every environment, in every region, but the fact that we are here today exchanging knowledge and lessons learned, the fact that we have this family of friends sitting with us here, not just from IFA, from the academia, from the private sector auditing firms, from the European Commission, etc., is actually the best that we can do as an institution to facilitate the international experience and the dialogue that all of you can network and continue learning from each other. So I just want to reiterate to our FOCAL members, because I'm speaking directly now to them, that the bank will continue to support you on this implementation of the IPSAS adoption. The COVID-19 has been really a challenge. In some countries, it has not stopped, but it has made some setbacks in the implementation plan. But we do hope that 2022 will bring new hope, and the fact that we are all in some way trying to get to a new norm will bring us together again, sometime face-to-face, and if not face-to-face, virtually like today. So without explaining or talking anything else more, I would like to thank you, Oscar, for presenting Peru today, and hope that the other countries will have the opportunity to invite the PULSAR members to learn and share from their experiences as we go along. Again, thank you very much for the invitation, Dimitri and the organizing team. This is a very good webinar, and I hope that you all learn, and I will learn as well. Thank you so much, and thank you to our distinguished panelists. Back to you, Dimitri.
Thank you, Armand Xiomara. Now I would like to invite Franz van Schaik, who was one of the main authors of the publication in question, to help me to present the key findings and recommendation of the paper. I will start the presentation, and then Franz will join me. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Very well. As I mentioned before, this is one of the most recent publication knowledge products of PULSAR FinCoP community of practice. Its main objective was to provide practical guidance for the first-time adoption of IPSAS based on worldwide experience, and also to summarize the main concept of IPSAS 33. In turn, the objective of IPSAS 33, which actually provide more detailed guidance on the first-time implementation of IPSAS, are to ensure that the first financial statements that use accrual IPSAS provide transparent reporting about the transition to IPSAS, provide a suitable starting point for compliance with IPSAS, are generated at cost that does not exceed the benefits. Franz, could you put in mute your microphone now?
Yes.
In terms of the paper structure, there is a different sections. The paper starts with the introduction. Then there is a brief discussion in terms of planning ahead of IPSAS 33 adoption. Then we discuss recognition and measurement in terms of the general principles and some exceptions from the general principle. The disclosures requirement are disclosed further. We present experience of five countries which recently implemented or tried to implement IPSAS, and finally we present some conclusions and recommendations. As Armand mentioned, this paper was built up and based on the first knowledge product of PULSAR, which was Public Sector Accounting Reform Roadmap, which presented a very general diagram or figure or roadmap of the main steps which are characterized with IPSAS implementation. You can see the figure on the screen. We also invite you to consult, to download this paper once you're exploring the PULSAR web page. Some of the main challenges that we identified during the development of the publication, and that most countries who are currently implementing IPSAS are very familiar with, are the following. First of all, political support and willingness of the key stakeholders, not only to initiate, but also to carry out and complete the reform. This is very important. This is the starting point. Agreement on a reform strategy and feasible implementation timeline, which should be also one of the first steps in the journey. And it's very important that the authorities in the reform lead agency try to avoid including unrealistic objectives and timeline. We know that the IPSAS implementation is a long-term and ambitious project, and it will take at least few years to be realized. Establishment of proper reform coordination and management arrangements. It's one of the critical success factors for the implementation of the reform. And it requires a lot of coordination among different authorities within the countries or jurisdictions. The next one is availability of required resources, which is also crucial. And we are not only talking about the financial resources, but also human resources. And many countries will face the problem, okay, how are we going to implement accrual-based IPSAS and then conduct accounting on accrual basis using IPSAS standards, and they don't have any expert in the country. So part of this step is the capacity building and start preparing public sector officials and train them in the accrual accounting and IPSAS. Timely amendment of legal and regulatory frameworks, it's also crucial, because usually it's a long term objective and it will take a few years, so it should be also be started as soon as possible. Some additional challenges that many countries would face is definition of the structure of the new public sector accounting system, including definition who will be the standard setting mechanisms, who will be responsible for issuing the new standards. In most of the cases, it's the Ministry of Finance, but we also could find different arrangements. For instance, in some countries, a Supreme Audit Institution, which could be questionable, but this is how it works now. In some other countries, like Mexico, for instance, an independent board was created, which is responsible for issuing and implementation of public sector accounting reform and new standards. The next factor is definition of risk management and mitigation mechanism that would help to prevent bottlenecks and any high risk associated with reform implementation and mitigate them in timely manner. Development of change management and capacity building strategy. I already briefly mentioned that. This includes also development of communication, dissemination, and training strategy or plans as part of this broader issue. Integration between different public financial management functions and systems, including budgeting, treasury, revenue, debt, fiscal statistics, procurement, among others, ideally through an existing or new integrated financial management information system. And talking about IFMIS, upgrading the existing development of a new system in parallel with the IPSAS implementation, it's also a critical factor. Franz, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dimitri. Ladies and gentlemen, IPSAS 33 first-time adoption of accrual basis IPSASes is a standard which is developed for direct implementation of IPSAS. And direct adoption, that means a government takes the IPSAS handbook of pronouncements off the shelf and implements it as it is. The IPSAS suite of standards is designed to be adopted in its entirety and without making changes to the standards. If a government, however, develops its own national public sector financial reporting framework by making adaptations to IPSAS, we call it indirect adoption. And these adaptations, they may relate to terminology, the choice of options offered by IPSAS, the inclusion of additional guidelines, or outright deviations from IPSAS, such as the omission of certain requirements, for example, consolidation or pension accounting. Entities are encouraged to adopt IPSAS directly because of comparability and transparency. Also, developing a national framework takes a long time and may slow down the implementation process. IPSAS 33 is a standard developed for direct adoption, but it's also helpful for indirect adoption. An implementation strategy can be based on one of two approaches, a phased approach or a Big Bang approach. Phased approach involves the progressive implementation of improvements in the planned sequence with the aim of meeting all IPSAS requirements by the end of the final phase. Big Bang approach entails a switch from the pre-existing accounting practices to full IPSAS compliance commencing from a particular date. The phased approach is inherent to IPSAS 33 because IPSAS 33 allows a gradual improvement over the 3-year period of transition. We recommend a phased approach to the implementation of IPSAS. A phased approach enables the jurisdictions to demonstrate quick wins by allowing some IPSAS requirements to be met in the short term, with progressive implementation of full IPSAS over the medium term. A phased approach also allows time to build IPSAS-related skills and expertise to upgrade the IT systems. We distinguish between a preparation phase, which precedes the adoption of IPSAS 33, and a transition phase, which follows the adoption of IPSAS 33. The preparation phase can take as long as needed, and this is usually a long time, sometimes even a decade. The transition phase can take a maximum of 3 years in accordance with IPSAS 33. During the preparation phase, entities present financial statements based on previous accounting practices, while during the transitional period, entities present financial statements based on IPSAS, albeit with some exemptions. Some of them may affect fair presentations, some may not. After the transitional period, entities should present their financial statements in full compliance with IPSAS. The coveted explicit and unreserved statement of compliance with IPSAS may only be included in the financial statements after the period of transition. The timeline from IPSAS adoption to first IPSAS financial statements looks like this. If the entity adopts some of the transitional exemptions in IPSAS 33 that affect the fair presentation of the financial statements. If there is no fair presentation, the entity cannot assert compliance with accrual basis IPSAS. At the top, we see the period of transition, and that is the period when the first-time adopter applies exemptions in IPSAS 33. At the left-hand side, we see the preparation phase, but the timeline of the preparation phase is not to scale because the preparation phase usually lasts considerably longer than shown here. Following the preparation phase, we see the date of adoption of IPSAS, when the opening statement of financial position is prepared. That is the balance sheet at the date of adoption of accrual IPSASes. Next comes the first traditional IPSAS financial statements, and these are the financial statements prepared in accordance with IPSAS 33. At this point in time, the first-time adopter cannot make an explicit and unreserved statement of compliance with the IPSAS framework as a whole. Next come the second and the third transitional IPSAS financial statements, and then we have the first IPSAS financial statements. And these are the first annual financial statements which include an explicit and unreserved statement of compliance with IPSAS. The typical wording of such a statement is, these financial statements have been prepared in accordance with IPSAS. The technical note on this next slide elaborates on six countries. The technical note includes the links to the financial statements in this sample. Most of the countries in the sample use the direct adoption approach. However, in practice, there are also many countries applying the indirect method. Most of the countries in the example chose a phased reform approach. This enables them to adopt a more flexible time period and to distribute the impact of the reform over a longer period. New Zealand is somewhat of a unique case in this respect. New Zealand's IPSAS implementation in 2015 was not such a big bang because New Zealand's legacy framework for public sector accounting was IFRS since already the early 1990s, which is of course in many ways consistent with IPSAS. It would be more accurate to say that New Zealand adopted IPSAS in a breeze, easily and without much effort after having already implemented IFRS decades before. As yet, only a limited number of jurisdictions used IPSAS 33 to apply a transitional period, taking advantage of the exemptions that affect fair presentation. One reason for the limited uptake of IPSAS 33 may be that countries may be wary of the 3-year limitation on the period of transition, because they are not sure that they will manage to comply with all the requirements of all the standards in time. Another reason may be that the standard has only been issued in January 2015, which is like 6 years ago, and that entities may also adopt IPSAS indirectly, and they then do not really need to apply IPSAS 33. In fact, only the Nigerian states apply the transitional period in IPSAS 33 for exemptions. In this sample, we included 2 in the sample, but there are many more Nigerian states applying IPSAS 33. The examples also illustrate that several jurisdictions apply transitional arrangements other than IPSAS 33, just like Tanzania did, because they already applied the transition arrangements when they were still located in the individual standards, such as in IPSAS 17, property, plant and equipment. The implementation of accrual accounting, if we look at the next slide, whether IPSAS or any other public sector accounting framework, is a long and arduous process. Jurisdictions should therefore allow for ample planning and preparation time before announcing the date of adoption of IPSAS 33, because after that, the clock starts ticking. Lessons learned from countries that embarked on the long and winding road to implement accrual IPSAS include: apply professional project planning and implementation methodologies such as PRINCE2. The impact of IPSAS implementation is not limited to the Accountant General's Department, to the Treasury or to the Ministry of Finance, so there is a need to set up an interdepartmental IPSAS project steering committee to drive the transition. And make sure that the project steering committee monitors the IPSAS adoption strategy, reassesses and adjusts as necessary. For the committee to be able to do that, prepare IPSAS progress reports, allowing the governing bodies to act when projects are at the risk of stalling. Make sure that the transition is mandatory for all entities concerned by amending laws, rules, and regulations early in the process. IPSAS projects take several years, so there is a need to allocate resources for the project through a multi-year budget mechanism. Other lessons learned are make budget available for additional human resources on the next slide in the administrative, budgetary, and finance areas for the transition to IPSAS. Make adequate resources available for training and for change management. Use all available means of communications, training, and dissemination to communicate awareness of the progress of the transition to IPSAS. Good project management also means adopt risk management and mitigation strategies. Integrate IT modules such as accounting, budgeting, and treasury management. And verify that the quality of the progress assessment reports is up to standard. So there is really a need for a quality assurance of those progress assessment reports. Then we come to the main recommendations of this technical note, and they are as follows. Consider the transitional period in IPSAS 33, the 3 years, as the last stage of the adoption process. You need to develop an implementation strategy and a plan that lays out a credible time frame for the accounting reforms ahead of the date of adoption. Train the staff in accounting, budgeting, and financing departments throughout the preparation phase and the period of, and appoint a champion for reform implementation, usually the MOF, the Accountant General's Department, or the Treasury, and make sure that there is close coordination with other key institutional stakeholders, such as the Supreme Audit Institution. The Auditor General or the Court of Audit is usually very supportive of the move to IPSAS. Other recommendations in the technical note on the next slide. Unless the incumbent accounting practices are very close to IPSAS, next slide, apply a phased approach to the implementation of IPSAS because a big bang approach is conducive to delay, and that's also risky. Preparing an opening statement of financial position or a balance sheet is a time-consuming task. That's obvious for entities that currently apply cash accounting, but it's also true for entities that currently apply modified cash or modified accrual accounting, because many of the assets and liabilities need considerable correction before they can go on live on a full accrual balance sheet. The opening balance sheet should not include any obsolete data that might come from legacy systems. When prioritizing IPSAS standards for implementation, keep in mind that there are several accounting standards for which IPSAS 33 does not provide any relief, such as IPSAS 2 cash flow statements. So it is a recommendable practice to first adopt the cash basis IPSAS 2 cash flow statements, and then go on to extend and then apply the full range of IPSAS standards. Apply as few exemptions in IPSAS 33 as possible, as they reduce the integrity of the financial statements during the transitional period. First time right, that is a lofty ideal, but may not be obtainable in practice. But the saying, you only get one chance to make a first impression, certainly applies to transitional IPSAS financial statements. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Dimitri, over to you.
Thank you, Franz. Now I would like to ask Svetlana Klemenko to take lead on moderation of the panel Main Challenges and Lessons Learned, and introduce our special guest. Svetlana, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Dmitry. It is a pleasure, as always, to be part of this discussion. So this panel is is going to look at some of the key challenges and opportunities and lessons learned from the IPSAS implementation. And we have 3 speakers who I think among the 3 of them probably combine half of the global experience on IPSAS implementation in different parts of the world. So it is very exciting to be able to hear their perspectives. And I probably will introduce them as they're going to do their presentations. Dmitry, are you going to project the PowerPoint? Yep.
Yes, we'll do now.
Yeah. Okay. So our first speaker, we didn't agree on the order of who goes first. So if Andreas Bergman, Dmitry, please go to the next slide. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So Andreas Bergman is going to be our first speaker. So Andreas, please, I will actually ask you to introduce yourself the way you would like to be introduced, and go ahead with your presentation.
Well, thank you, Svetlana. I think most of the participants in both regions, in PULSAR and in FOCAL, know me. I'm a professor of public financial management at Zurich University of Applied Sciences, and I was the IPSAS speed chair between 2010 and 2015. So I'm actually responsible for issuing IPSAS 33 at that stage. Now, I really would like to speak about the challenges and the lessons learned in implementing IPSAS, not about standard setting now. I think really what I recollect in many countries I have been working is, yes, it can be done, but it's no easy task. So it is difficult, it is a challenging project, but it is possible to achieve a good result. We have heard from Xiomara already, but also from Franz and Dimitri about the direct and indirect adoption. In my experience, both have been successful. So it's not either or, it's really one which is better. No, it's both are possible. However, I tend to recommend indirect adoption nowadays, because the main advantage is really that the issues are addressed early in the process. And what are the issues? The issues are, for instance, political and institutional capacity and support. It's sometimes very easy in direct adoption to adopt all the IPSASs without being aware, for instance, about the budgetary implications. And of course, if you do it indirectly, you meet the budget department early in the process and find out about the issues, for instance, as regards budget, or as regards debt management, or as regards statistics. Also, the advantage of indirect adoption is that you have a really stringent anchoring in the national legislation. And this includes, of course, not only the standards, but also the conceptual framework, policies, the chart of accounts, interpretations, and guidance. So that's why I'm more inclined towards the indirect adoption nowadays. Second point, well, IPSAS 33, I have to admit, is only partly feasible. It is very useful as it allows for deemed cost measurement when there are no documents to be found and you need to measure, for instance, your assets. But really that 3-year exception and disclosure approach, which is taken by IPSAS 33, is not working. It's probably not working because 3 years are not enough, and really the exceptions are sometimes even more difficult to handle than directly or indirectly adopting IPSAS. And in some cases, actually, the disclosure requirements are relatively stringent. Lastly, technical capacity. I think it is very important to be aware that you need some technical capacity, and actually there is no IT solution which comes directly from the shelf. So every solution has to be designed, has to be developed. And this is also true for the interfaces, for instance, with government finance statistics, GFS, which should be included in the development of the IT solution. So these are my 3 thoughts, and I'm happy to discuss with you further.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andreas. Before we will open the floor for discussion, we are going to hear from Patrice. Next, Patrice Shumesh is the partner and global lead on the public sector accounting standards at PwC. Patrice, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Svetlana. So yes, you introduced myself very well. On the key takeaways and the key lessons learned that I wanted to highlight here, well, of course there are many of them, but I could have chosen, but I selected 3 which in my view are probably among the most important. The first one is that making the change to IPSAS is just not an accounting exercise. It's really, and probably we all know it, but a full transformation project. And the various dimensions of the projects need to be carefully considered in order for the project to be successful. You know, a typical approach is usually to start with a gap analysis. So you compare what you already have, which is a current situation, with what you should have in the end, which is IPSAS. And then you define the roadmap on how to move from the one to the other. But in doing that, you not only need to define new accounting policies, which I would say most projects do, but you also need to identify what the impact of these new policies will be in terms of new data, new information to be collected, and also in terms of adaptations to the processes, information flows, and systems in order to be able to generate the new IPSAS information. And the new IPSAS information, not only at the transition date, but also on a recurring basis afterwards. So the embedding aspects are very important. And too often, what I see in practice is a piecemeal approach, where the different components of the projects are considered in isolation, with sometimes a focus on designing the accounting policies, but without looking at the impact on the processes, or for example, wanting to develop an IT system, but without having done first a sound conceptual analysis of how the system should be designed in order to be able to generate the IPSAS information. So my key message here is that a holistic approach is really key to the success of the project. The second message, and again, it is one that is probably known by everyone as well, we already said it today, is that, of course, making the change to IPSAS is a major undertaking, and it can take several years. And of course, the duration of the project itself depends also on the starting point. So do you already have a mature accrual accounting system, which might be in a certain extent inspired by IPSAS, or are you starting nearly from scratch with a pure cash accounting system with no information or nearly no about your assets and liabilities, and no comprehensive record, for example, of your fixed assets? And only that can take a number of years when you think of, all the big infrastructure assets, real estate properties, etc. This can really be a huge task. But I would say good practice is to focus on the big tickets first. I would say, in the first place, do not care too much about the details. Just focus on the most important assets, liabilities, the most important flows in the income statement. And if certain topics cannot be treated with the same level of detail immediately, or if certain workaround need to be taken because the processes and the systems cannot be adapted immediately, then move forward, and you can improve in stages a bit later. Of course, you should not leave all the problems on the table for later, but I would say selectively focusing on the most important aspects enables to have some quick wins. And I think it is important to show progress and to demonstrate that you have done some concrete achievement. So keep it simple, and also keep the momentum, because otherwise there is always the danger of reform fatigue, which some of you may also recognize. But it's important just to show that you progress. And even after the first official IPSAS financial statements are produced, you can still have an improvement plan to fix a number of issues every year and communicate positively on the progress you're making. For example, this can also be attested by the auditors, which will have less and less qualifications in their audit report. So the world has not been created in one day. And really what I would like to insist on here is just go for a positive trend, go for an improvement plan over the years and communicate positively on that. And then the last one, I would say last but not least, is that making the change to IPSAS, of course, is not an objective in itself, it's just an enabler, because to really capture the whole benefits of such an exercise, well, normally a wider finance reform is really recommended. Better accounting normally provides a foundation for better reporting, which should provide better information for decision making. And you know, there are a number of already existing publications on studies on the topic. For example, in the context of the IPSAS project, so the harmonization projects in Europe, we surveyed a number of countries that already made the move to accrual accounting with quite a mature accounting system. And then the main benefit cited by those governments was, okay, accrual accounting gives much more comprehensive and more relevant information. And this was really the trigger and the driver for the reform. So first key benefit is good accounting supports decision-making. But the second benefit, I would say, just do not forget to use the information that you have, information which is produced by the IPSAS accrual accounting system. And when I'm talking of this, I'm of course talking of the IPSAS financial statements, but not only. I can also talk about more summarized financial information or summarized information prepared based on IPSAS financial, but which are, you know, summarized in a more digestible way and use it as a communication tool. It's also probably a good opportunity to reinforce or to restore, in certain cases, a trust that key stakeholders like citizens or sometimes the donors may have with the government by disclosing and again explaining in a transparent way, in a simple to understand way, the impact of the new standards on the policy decisions taken. So these were, Svetlana, the key takeaways from my side.
Thank you very much, Patrice. So now we are moving to Thomas Mueller. And Thomas is a partner and global lead for public sector accounting standards at E&Y. He also is a chair of consultative advisory group for IPSAS-B, and I have to say that in big part, thanks to Thomas' chairmanship, consultative advisory group has been incredibly active, very useful in the way it helps to guide IPSAS-B work, and really stands out among similar groups which are advising different standard setting bodies. So with this, Thomas, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Svetlana. And I can immediately convey this compliment to the great members of the CAG, like Franz, who is supporting to the discussion as well. So thank you, Svetlana, for these kind words. Hello to everybody from PULSAR, and buenos dias a nuestros amigos in Latino America. I think it's a little bit an unfavorable task to speak after approximately 60% of the global implementation experience, including France's presentation, but I try to bring some different perspectives, and I can keep it short because we definitely have a discussion afterwards. So looking at the three key takeaways which I wanted to emphasize today, first, and I think it was shortly mentioned already, firstly by Xiomara, but by others as well, the implementation certainly is not going to be successful and sustainable without political support of and consensus among and across political parties of the whole political landscape. So why am I saying that? I think it has been outlined already before that it is a long-term project, and in this kind of long period, political balances change. And obviously, a project like this should not be dependent on who is leading the Ministry of Finance or who is leading in a leading position in the government. We have seen many reforms dramatically slowing down with a change in the political leadership, and this is definitely not helpful for the country as a whole. You definitely see impact on resources. You see an impact on the organizational positioning of the steering committee or the PMO or whoever has the responsibility for the reform. And you definitely see a change and a decrease in the attention of the project. In terms of positive examples, I think one can look at Austria. In Austria, there was reached a consensus across all political parties, with the consequence that the reform has been embedded in the constitution even. And with that, I think it is completely regardless which political party is leading and is kind of leading the Ministry of Finance, the reform is going to continue and is going to be sustainable, at least at the kind of the level as it is. And last but not least, I think Patrice already has mentioned reform fatigue in these kind of projects. A little bit of pressure is unavoidable and is definitely helpful, and therefore political leadership and attention to this project is key. Second, it needs to be ensured that the implementation project is relevant to stakeholders. What do I mean by that? Relevant means that obviously it should not, and Patrice has mentioned that, and it's kind of written here in red as well, it should not be seen as being an accounting exercise which is running somehow parallel to the normal activities of government, and you're just doing kind of like a hobby, which is a project implementation of accruals or implementation of IPSAS. It needs to be embedded by clarity in the use of the newly generated information for future decision making and accountability procedures, discharging procedures in laws and regulations from the very beginning. And only if that is done, I think everybody looks at the project being really highly relevant and to be followed. It's always confusing if you have different accounting systems in place for one kind of one-side decision making in the parliament, kind of looking at a cash-based budget and kind of budget execution reports on cash, and on one side having reporting which kind of is based on accruals but runs like somehow in parallel. I think that confuses everybody, especially it confuses politicians, and it leads to kind of a statement that accrual information is not helpful at all because they don't understand it. Last but not least here, a third point as well, it is necessary to achieve full transparency about the starting point of the reform, kind of right at the beginning. And Franz talked about the planning and preparation phase. I think it was mentioned by Andreas as well. I think this really is requiring a high diligence in kind of this planning and preparation phase in order to find out where do you stand in terms of jurisdictional setting, in terms of gaps between your current accounting practice or current accounting framework and what are the requirements of IPSAS. In terms of knowledge, and this is definitely competency and capacity including, in terms of IT and processes, but also in terms of what is the information being already available. Sometimes it's quite surprising what countries and governments have already on hand when it comes to a kind of information. Somehow, or sometimes it's the opposite. The government thinks it has a lot of information, but if you dig deeper, it's not usable because it's not reliable. So get clarity and transparency and on the position where you start from if you enter or when entering the reform, avoids kind of inefficiencies or disappointments and delays in the project. So I think that's in a nutshell from my side, and now happy to contribute to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Colleagues, so at this stage, we have about 10-15 minutes left for our segment, and we would like to open the floor to questions. I have some questions of my own, but I would rather hear from the participants. So Dmitry, over to you to ask for questions.
Thank you, Svetlana. Colleagues, if you have any question, please send them directly in the chat using your preferred language. Maybe Svetlana, in the meanwhile, you can ask a couple of questions that we prepared.
Yeah, so the question that I would like to ask is related to the broader aspect of this reform. So I think we have heard some very good suggestions on how this reform should be approached and what are the key lessons learned. Now, we know that this is, if the government is going to implement IPSAS, this means a relatively major public sector reform, which is not going to be self-contained, clearly. So from your experience, Patrice, Andreas, and Thomas, what are the other areas and reforms which the governments need to be thinking through if they have the intention to move towards the IPSAS accrual accounting? Please, who would like to respond?
I don't know. I could start if my colleagues do not want to take the floor immediately. But so Svetlana, there are many aspects, but obviously one is probably for governments that do such a reporting, the GFS or the statistical reporting, which, for example, in Europe is very important because we have a special regulation for that, but also in other parts of the world. And I would say here, of course, it will be very important to try to link the two to the extent possible, because well, there are similarities, there are areas where things can be implemented in the same way. So wherever possible, just try to minimize the areas of differences is really something which might be very interesting. The other one we already touched upon it is of course, well, embedded everything in the national accounting legislation, which is very important for legal purposes and to have more credibility afterwards. And also, but not least, and I would like to be clear on that, we should not forget the budget dimension. Of course, IPSAS does not require to do the budget on a accrual basis, and if you choose to stay on a cash basis, of course, the budget procedures will not change. However, what I would like to highlight as well is that you know, when you define the new processes, you'll need to go through, you know, different cycles, different processes, and then you will need to identify a number of, for example, a number of events that have an accounting impact, a number of other events that have a budget impact, and probably some which will have an impact on both on the budget and the accounting. And then when you design, I would say, your accounting flows and you design your systems, you will obviously need to have some overlap areas, and this is something that also should be taken care of. So in addition to everything which was said already before, like, you know, the link with the internal management reporting system, so the need to go for, well, to support the decision making, those are probably the statistical reporting and the budget dimensions also key areas to not to forget when moving to accrual accounting and IPSAS.
If I can jump in, Svetlana, at that point, I think probably the question is a little bit different from what you asked. I would probably ask which other reforms are enabled by implementation of accruals, or what policy areas are affected. I think that was also a question which is very relevant. And actually, I think probably it is all reforms which are kind of based on kind of information about available resources like health, the health sector, or the reform of the education sector. Just as some observations which were done in some countries, it was just on the basis of the information captured in the accrual implementation project that a country like Saudi Arabia was able to kind of restructure their complete health sector and kind of make the provider, the health providers, some kind of self-financing, because they realized what's the need, the budget and the financing need for these, which was only able based on the efforts and results of the IPSAS implementation project. So it's all policy areas which are heavily depending on resources and the right allocation of those resources to get to know where are the resources and are they rightly allocated. It's all kind of policy areas which are kind of creating by the financing, creating long-term obligations of governments like social security reforms or social benefit programs. And obviously it's all policy areas where the government acts as a provider of trust and security by providing either loans or guarantees, which obviously is definitely a highly relevant topic in terms of financial reporting as well. So all economic growth programs, support of small and medium businesses and related issues. So all these kind of areas are heavily depending on information which comes out of the IPSAS and Accrual implementation project as a basis.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Yes, this was a very good addition to this answer, because the point that I would like to stress is that really the IPSAS reform should not and should never be considered in isolation. It has the multiple implications on systems, on policies, on the way the government is going to be perceived, how the risks associated with the government operations as well as opportunities are going to be perceived by different users. So this sequence needs to be thought through, in particular when it comes to such areas as social benefits. So thank you very much really for highlighting this. Dmitry, I saw that we have a question in Spanish in our chat, and maybe if you could translate it for everybody.
I think Andres wanted to add something, and then we can go to the question in the chat.
No,
Okay.
I'm happy. Dimitri, I'm happy to go to the question in the chat. I can make that point as well. I have read them, and I can answer them right away.
Thank you. Let me then translate them very quickly. We have a couple of questions. The first one is from Maria Teresa Aguero, who is Accountant General of Paraguay. Is the adjustment to the IFMIS, Integrated Financial Management System, crucial for the IPSAS implementation? This is the first question. The second question from Walter Apas is how the country managed to implement accrual-based IPSAS and reconciled with different bases used for budget, cash versus accrual. And there is another question from Leonardo. It's in English. I think it's extremely difficult for a country to follow the exemption of IPSAS 33, as each country has its own reality, political support, system, scope of implementation of the consolidation standards, and so on. The best alternative, in my opinion, would be customized implementation plan for each reality. What do you think of this approach? Leonardo used to be IPSAS board member and also Accountant General of Brazil. Andres, maybe you can start with this first set of questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. And firstly, I really agree with Leonardo. I think that's all I can say. Yes, you need a specific plan for each country. So that's definitely required. But then to the more technical questions of Maria Teresa, really the IFMIS system is one of the key challenges, as I said on my short presentation. And in my view, it has a lot to do actually with the second question from Walter Apasa from Peru with budgeting. Really, I think the system needs to be designed in a way that it accommodates the actual relationship between budgeting and accounting, and then also finance statistics, as Patrice has mentioned. Just to give you three small examples, in Colombia, for instance, budgeting is completely separate from accounting. It's even by different institutional entities which are responsible, different standards, etc. This is an extreme example because most countries are not there. But of course, this is a situation you can find, and then of course the system needs to be completely separate in the case of Colombia. Most countries have really a mixed system, so they do have some budget execution through the accounting system, and then of course the system has to accommodate for this budget execution. And this can be on full accrual basis, such as it is, for instance, in Ecuador, in Chile, in Switzerland. But it can also be on a cash basis, and that is Walter's question actually. It can, in many countries, be on a cash basis. And if it is not on the full accrual basis, or even if it is on the full accrual basis, in my view, really the bridging element is the chart of accounts, because the chart of accounts then has to bridge the budgeting function and the accounting function. And of course, this all needs to be very carefully developed, and that's why I get back to the point Leonardo has made. We need a specific plan for each country, because it's not useful to use, for instance, the plan Colombia used in a country where budgeting and accounting is integrated, and vice versa. So we need to have a specific plan.
Can I just add, Svetlana,
yes,
to...
Please go ahead, Thomas. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, very kind. And just two additions, kind of probably, firstly, just kind of confirming what Andreas said on the question of Leonardo. To be honest, I have not come across any country which purely has executed IPSAS 33. Because nearly every country, even if they are going to direct implementation, they create, as Leonardo said, based on their own specific reality, they created their own roadmap and implementation plan, and that is definitely suitable. Second question regarding the IFMIS, I think are adjustments crucial? I think certainly that depends on the IFMIS which you are using currently, but in most cases with the IPSAS implementation reform, there's only also an IFMIS implementation reform connected, which is either SAP or Oracle or whatever kind of company you name here. And obviously, I think what I would recommend is not only to look at adjustments which are needed to the IFMIS, but also adjustments which are needed to supporting subsystems and the interfaces between the two, because very often I think governments forget to kind of look at how are our sometimes self-constructed supporting subsystems communicating with the IFMIS, and some surprises are faced during the project then if you realize that, for example, the revenue subsystem is not able to communicate, the tax revenue subsystem is not able to communicate with SAP for whatever reason, and you can't account for the tax revenue being collected. So things like that. So definitely, yes, the answer is yes, it is crucial to look at that.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Patrice, would you like to add anything to this?
You're muted, Patrice.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm unmuted now. You hear me? Yeah, that's right. So I said nearly everything has been said, but just two little details. On the IFMIS, I think Thomas alluded to it, but what is very important is when you change a system, it's important first to at least have made a number of conceptual thinking before, because you cannot change the systems and afterwards do your gap analysis and look that you should undo what you already have changed in your system. So it's really important that the sequence of the methodology that you should follow is really there, and that you first do your conceptual thinking, and afterwards you need to translate it into how you will generate the information. And the system is just one way of getting the information and generating the information in a reliable and on an ongoing basis. Now on IPSAS 33, yes, and I think it's very much based as well on, and I think this Thomas in his presentation, which insisted on that, and rightfully, is that it all depends also on, the information that you have, because you can have, well, you are given a framework to make your life easier, which is IPSAS 33, but it's all based in the end on the reality of what exists on the ground and the information that is available, and what you can do in the time frame that you have decided for your reform. And as I mentioned earlier, you can move with what you can do first, and then you can improve over time, which also would be a nice recommendation probably.
Thank you very much, Patrice. Unfortunately, we are out of time. The discussion has been great, and we have additional questions, including how countries should go about incorporating new standards, which would have been issued after the implementation process has started. So, Dmitry, perhaps subsequent presenters could try to address some of these questions. I would like to really thank Andreas, Patrice, and of course Thomas for their time and for their shared experience. I don't know, Dmitry, how it works with you. If some participants have individual questions that they would like to follow up with Thomas, Patrice, or Andreas, what is the way for them to get in touch?
Thank you, Svetlana. We will have a question and answer question at the end of the session. So all the remaining questions we can do later on during the event. Thank you very much. Svetlana, Andreas, Patrice, Thomas, this was extraordinary panel. Now I would like to invite Livia and Jan to share their views on the topic from standard setters' perspective. Livia, the floor is yours. I will project your presentation.
Thank you, Dmitry. I don't know if you can see presentation already, perhaps. Could you please confirm that you see presentation and you can hear me? Dmitry?
Please go ahead. I can hear you. I hope the presentation is on the screen. Can anybody confirm, please? Franz, can you see the presentation? Okay, go ahead, please. Go ahead, please. The presentation is ready.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much, Dmitry. I'm glad that I can contribute to today's
I think Livia was having some issues with the connection. Hopefully she can reconnect. Maybe we could start with Jan instead, who is already joining us.
Yep. Hello, Dmitry. Hello, everyone. So let me see if I can actually share my screen. I might need you to come in if I can't. Do you want to show the slides, Dmitry, and we'll just move it on? I think that's the easiest thing.
I will do.
So thank you very much, everyone, for the opportunity to talk to you today. I think this is an excellent, really helpful report. And certainly I found it very useful examination of the issues. I think as a board, we were conscious that there were some issues in the application of this standard, and certainly and it may have been mentioned already, we know that there are some issues around terminology and things like that, and actually the board took a decision yesterday that it will include a proposal to do a limited scope update of IPSAS 33 in the work plan consultation, which is due to come out probably sort of late July. So that's something that will certainly be informed by this report and some of the discussions that we've already had today. What I wanted to do was actually then set that in the context as to why this is really important, and to just give you very much an overview of a report that's actually been published today to coincide with this event. So if you can start playing the slides, Dimitri. So,
are you projecting on your end, Jan?
I don't. Hang on. Let me try. No, I think oh, okay.
Okay, let me do it again.
I think I'm good. Let's try that. Right, we're in business. Can you see that, Dimitri? Can you see the slide, Dimitri?
Yes, I can see them.
Yeah, okay. So, so what we've launched today is the second status report for the International Public Sector Financial Accountability Index. And what this does is it looks at information on the levels of accrual usage around the world, and also the frameworks that people are using to report on around the world. The original report was published back in 2018. This report actually covers 3 data points. So we have the 2020 index, which is what was actually happening in 2020. We have a forecast position or forecast positions for 2025. And then based on information about reform plans, we have projections through to 2030. The number of jurisdictions in the index has actually gone up by 15 compared to 150 in 2018. And the other thing that we cover in there is some practical guidance where we're looking to update the what was the document Study 14 that will become a website with various different tools and resources called Pathways to Accrual, and that's due for launch later on this year. So what does the 2020 index actually show? Well, in terms of levels of accrual, that's the headline, that during 2020 we had 30% of governments, and by that we mean federal or central governments around the world reporting on accrual, 40% on partial accrual and 30% on cash. Now, various different frameworks in usage for reporting around the world, and that's a 6% rise since 2018 in terms of the number of governments on accrual, so up from 24%, which is the restated number across 165 governments rather than 150 in the original report. In terms of the use of frameworks, of the 49 jurisdictions on accrual in 2020, 4 used IPSAS with no modifications, and by that we mean they used the standards directly, just making use of the choices, for example, measurement basis for assets within the standards. 8 used IPSAS modified for the local context, and quite often that's through, there is a national endorsement process which brings the standards into the local framework, and New Zealand, for example, does that. Then you can have national standards where they use IPSAS in some way, shape or form within the framework. And overall, those 3 usages in 2020, 57% of those 49 jurisdictions were using IPSAS in one of the ways. Then you can have jurisdictions using IFRS modified for the local context. My own jurisdiction, the UK, is an example of that, as is Australia. And then you can have national standards developed through a national process, not using international standards. And there are some examples of that. For example, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board standards for state and local governments in the US is an example of that. So that's the picture in 2020. Looking then at the trends that we see, and I mentioned the trend towards accrual between 2018 and 2020, we see that continuing strongly in the forecast for 2025 and then through to 2030. And the figures, I must stress, for 2030, we've not been able to sort of subject those to the sort of detailed review that we've done for 2025, but I think it's still, you can see a strong trend internationally from cash through partial accrual to accrual. And I think that underlines the importance of guidance like IPSAS 33 and understanding the issues that you've been talking about earlier on today, as you get that increasing number of governments moving towards accrual over the coming years. If I look at the usage of frameworks, that's the position that I just showed you for 2020. That changes then for 2025. You can see the number on the national standards other and IFRS stays reasonably static, but the number using IPSAS directly or modified for the local context, both of those increase significantly, as does the number using national standards, but with some reference to IPSAS. And then what we see in the 2030 projection is that trend continuing. So again, IFRS modified for the local context, national standards, others staying pretty stable. Those who are moving to accrual, basically choosing one of those approaches, IPSAS direct, IPSAS modified, or developing their own standards but drawing on IPSAS. So those are the top line results from the survey that we've launched today. If you go to the IFAC website, you will find there's more information on that as well as the actual report itself. But I thought it was worthwhile sort of sharing those with you today. I'll stop sharing my screen with that. So happy to take questions and to discuss. Hopefully that was useful, Dimitri.
Thank you, Ian. I think we still have the connection issue with Livia, but hopefully she's able to join us. Oh, she's joining us right now. Livia, can you turn on the camera?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, we can see you.
Okay, great. So I was just talking to myself. I did not realize I'm out of the meeting.
Sorry about that. We lost you at some point, but we are glad you were able to reconnect.
But were you able to hear any part of my presentation or not at all?
Not at all. We had to switch to Ian.
Okay.
So if you could start from the beginning, and you should be able, your presentation as well, you can switch between the display modes in the left upper corner where it says leave video and presentation. There you should be able to see your presentation. I will share it now.
Okay.
Okay, can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Switch to the presentation mode. We are on the first slide now.
It's still reading for me. I think there is some technical problem, but I can speak without seeing the presentation if that is okay, if you all can see it.
Yes, I think we all can see it. Just guide me when I should change the slide.
Okay. So thank you very much. I'm glad that I can contribute to today's event on lesson learned from the first time IPSAS adoption. We can go to first slide. I will start by briefly touching on the IPSAS approach and focus more on first-time implementation guidance and some studies with lesson learned from accrual reforms. We can go to the next one. So I will cover experiences of EU member states. As you may know, we are working on European public sector accounting standards. Project is divided in two phases, where the first phase is focusing on improving fiscal transparency in the short to medium term by promoting accrual accounting reforms in member states, which are largely based on IPSAS or national standards similar to IPSAS, while in parallel developing IPSAS framework. And second phase will address comparability within and between the member states in medium to long term. We could go to another slide, please. In 2015, Eurostat, together with the experts from member states and international accounting organization, started work on first-time implementation guidance, which was published in 2017. It is practical guidance helping member states with their accounting reforms, moving from a cash basis to accruals, encouraging IPSAS implementation. It takes a pragmatic approach for the compilation of the opening balance sheet, focusing on significant transactions and recognition of balance sheet items, also covering PPE and component approach, heritage and military assets, or receivable and payables, and touching on disclosures. We could move to next one. Throughout the whole process, there was close cooperation with IPSAS board, and part of the guidance is covering comparison of IPSAS 33 and IPSAS guidance. Just to mention key differences, IPSAS 33 offering top-down detailed guidance during transition period, offering relief from individual IPSAS standards, so-called omission approach. Whereas IPSAS first-time implementation is more bottom-up pragmatic guidance for preparing first-time accrual opening balance sheet and accrual-based financial statements using inclusion approach. So what are the minimum requirements for first-time recognition and pragmatic recommendations for measurement? We could go to next slide, please. Now a few words on studies analyzing suitability of IPSAS in EU and possible impact of implementing accrual accounting in public sector in Europe. Both studies were prepared by our contractor at the time, PricewaterhouseCoopers. First was published in 2014 and assessed IPSAS and their application in EU member states, their transposition into national legislation, accounting maturity per government level and per accounting area. Accounting maturity was calculated based on use of IPSAS in EU member states. And the second study was follow-up and collected information on lesson learned from accrual accounting reforms in selected EU member states. It covers individual topics from objective, scope, and stakeholders' involvement through implementation timelines and benefits. Most of that was already covered today. And now I would like to focus more on last two bullets, common difficulties, and the recommendation for the implementation of reforms. If we could go to the next slide, please. So common difficulties were divided in two groups. First, related to project management, the most common reported by member states were challenging timelines for the whole reform, but also during individual steps of the reform. Communication and training, which was insufficient, costly, and often not well organized, and complexity and cost of IT system. Second group covers functional and technical difficulties, adaptation of the policies, processes, and systems, registration and valuation of assets and liabilities, and use of accrual data for information and decision making. If we could please go to the next slide. On these next two slides, we have 4 groups of good practices and recommendations as collected from some EU member states reforms. On the beginning, Dmitry mentioned common challenges of the reforms, and I think these recommendations correspond well with the challenges mentioned. So I will just go very briefly through them, but the study is offering concrete examples and experiences of individual member states. So first, good implementation practices. Implementation roadmaps should be aligned with the reform objective. Unified governance and dedicated strong project management, binding legal provision. We already heard today that political support is very important. Clear guidelines for everyone and effective assistance throughout the implementation, and preparation of formalized training plans. Second group, key factors of success. involvement and support of necessary stakeholders, appropriate timeline, IT integration from the beginning of the reform. Next, please. Cost management. Very often happened that the costs were not recorded during the reform, or there was very big overspending. So relevant cost drivers and relevant approaches of cost control, good practices for monitoring costs during the project implementation, and good practices to outweigh the cost in the long term. And the last group, promotion of the use of accrual data. There is a common question in public sector. Once we have accrual data, what do we do with this data and how we use them? So facilitating the use of accrual accounting data by internal users, helping external stakeholders understand and use accrual-based financial reports, bridging the gap between accrual and cash-based financial reporting. And if we could move to the last slide, please. It's just to show improvement in accounting maturity in EU member states in the period between 2013 and 2018, where we can see increase from 51 to 65% in the central government after implementing accrual accounting reforms, largely based on IPSASs. Also, we have similar picture on a local and state level, and further progress is expected by 2025. And the very last one, just if you are interested, the first-time implementation guidance and both studies can be found on our webpage, so please have a look, and thank you all.
Thank you very much, Livia and Ian. That was very enlightening. Now I would like to invite Ludmila and Oscar to present Ukraine and Peru experience in implementing IPSAS for the first time. Ludmila, can you hear me?
Да, я вас слышу. Добрый день.
Yes, good day. I can hear you. And can you hear me? We can hear you. Let's begin with you, please. And my presentation, please.
So switch your floors accordingly.
Thank you very much. And could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Good day to you all. Good morning, dear colleagues. If you're on the other side of the world, I'd like to thank all participants of this session and organizers, of course, for possibility to participate in this conference. For us, this is very important to exchange experiences. That's great. But today I have learned many new and interesting things for myself. And what's most important, before sharing the experience of Ukraine and our reform of public sector accounting, I want to say that all previous speakers very correctly identified factors and resources that facilitate public sector accounting reform, as you can see on this slide. But I wanted also to underline how important it is when we begin public sector accounting reform. We need to understand that this is not required from a requirement from the outside, not requirement from Ministry of Finance. It's a need of internal users to get reliable, correct information about the state of public finances, public resources for future decision making. And I'd like to add to what previous speakers said with one note. In order to fulfill all the tasks that have been set systematically according to strategies and action plans for every country, but particularly for Ukraine, we really needed support of international partners, support of the World Bank, support of experts that have followed through in our work, in our reforms beginning 2007. Thank you. And next slide, please. At this slide, you can see that in Ukraine, the strategy for public accounting reform, it was not standalone reform. First, in 2007, the public administration reform strategy was approved. It's a large document approved by the government. Then we went into strategy of public finance reform, and then PSA reform strategy. This is a huge overall reforming system strategy that began in 2007, and this process has continued. So public accounting system reform, it has been scheduled until 2025, and I will talk about this a bit later. Identifying main issues. These strategies have identified measures, events, tasks, and main indicators. That is very important in order to properly monitor the processes and to fulfill elements of each reform. What's the purpose of the implementation of public sector accounting reform? First, every level needs to have understanding that we need to get transparent and reliable financial reporting in order to effectively manage financial resources of the state. This is goal number one. And these objectives listed on the slide is to continue reforming mechanism of financial public finances at every level. Ukraine continues with the decentralization reform, establishing local communities, establishing budgets for them, ensuring openness and transparency of information about economic position of each accounting entity and budget as a whole. And this information is important for planning processes, for budget implementation, analysis, and for proper decision making at government level for financial management, and also to build public accounting system for budget execution, for consolidation of budgets, and for transparency, so that internal users and external users would use proper information, as well as international organizations. International financial institutions could analyze our information properly, as well as budget operators and international financial markets could understand and publicize relevant information. Next slide about legislative framework that shows who needs to do what in process of reforming public accounting and what standards should be applied in public accounting. And if in the past the strategies that I mentioned, they were approved by our government, then the law on public accounting and budget code are approved by the parliament. And the law on accounting says that Ukraine applies national regulations and standards of public sector accounting based on international public sector accounting standards, IPSAS. Regulation of methodology is carried out by the Ministry of Finance. Consolidation of financial reporting is done by our Treasury, and also we need to have general understanding who consolidates all financial reporting. So statistical reporting, tax reporting, and other types of reporting should use this accounting data. And just like we've heard today already, and that's next slide, please. why application of these standards should be indirect IPSAS implementation. All previous speakers were correct, and I support them very much. Every country has peculiarities of budget legislation. There are peculiarities in Ukraine as well. There are very special things about management of public property and financial policy, and so our decision was not about direct implementation of IPSAS. But then the question you might have, dear colleagues, is whether national standards fully comply with IPSAS. And we worked very closely with experts of the World Bank through the project that was conducted in 2018. And before we applied this strategy, we had assessment of our national standards by international experts. And their conclusion was that about 80% of international standards, IPSAS standards, are fully or partially applied and used in regulatory framework of Ukraine. Next slide, please. And at the next slide, I will not go into details, but you can see brief analysis of IPSAS compliance in Ukraine. These are key positions to develop information and to present it. And these main positions are in compliance with IPSAS standards. Next slide, please. What are achieved results? First, Ukraine, over the last 4 years, has developed and implemented 20 national standards of public sector accounting. I don't know if it's much or little, but some of the IPSAS standards are implemented through those national regulations. Some IPSAS norms are implemented into the law, not just in regulation, in order to have comprehensive policy of application. Unfortunately, only 4 years ago, this single chart of accounts was implemented, but it's fully approved by our regulation. Single chart of accounts for accounting in public sector, for the budget classification, for execution of the budget, for social and pension insurance, as well as procedure of applications were introduced. And now all budgeting is done according to single chart of accounts. The IT system of Treasury is adapted to fully ensure this process. Then we have had transition of managers of budgetary funds into accrual system, and we have e-reporting, and this is a system which is a treasury system, according to which all quarterly reporting and annual reporting is done by budgetary entities into the treasury. They submit the quarterly and annual report so that all indicators could be verified according to financial information. And over the last 2 years, Treasury provides consolidated financial reporting on overall property status and performance of all public sector entities and budgets at national level. For 2 years, our Treasury was doing this consolidation on implementation of local budgets and national budgets according to each budgetary entity. Next slide, please. It talks about application of accounting methods in the public sector. Well, our governmental and local budgets are still used, cash accounting, but central government bodies, social security funds, local, are using the accrual reporting. The question of pilot projects. Well, for financial reporting is done on cash basing, but we are still discussing possibility to go into full accounting on accrual, but that's for later. Next slide is about connection between reform of PSA and financial management system. We have about 50,000 budget managers, and the chart of accounts is the same for everyone, so that the chart of accounts would be matching with classification and reporting. Everyone follows the same budget classification, and they do financial reporting according to this classification. Then methodological recommendations are in compliance with the Treasury IT products. So statistics draw their information from the Treasury, while Treasury system is integrated with electronic procurement system. You can follow through every operation online according to classification methods and the chart of accounts in accounting. Another important achievement that we have is disclosure of financial transactions on the Treasury single account at the web portal for public funds, e-data. It's done online. And you could follow through the implementation of public resource management to ensure control over use of funds. It's done online, real time, with monitoring risk according to risk oriented method. Ludmila, let's go briefly through remaining slides because we are short on time. The next slide. And you can study my presentation in more detail because this slide shows integration between different public finance management functions and systems. But I'd like to respond to the question, what shall we do if the reform of public finance management is ongoing, like in Ukraine, and IPSAS standards are being implemented, but IPSAS keeps improving? What can we do with national standards? So in Ukraine, now we are going through translation of latest IPSAS standards with help of the WorldBank and experts. We're developing table of comparison between national standards and international standards, and now we are working on improvement of national standards. That's ongoing process. As soon as IPSAS standards change or approaches change, we make update to national standards. And the last thing I'd like to point out that with the help of this project, we have developed in Ukraine and we have applied. We have proposed united form to overcome key differences between national standards and international standards. And this comparison will be published at the website of Ministry of Finance for all users to benefit. Thank you, Dmitry. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Ludmila. Ludmila, please mute your microphone. And Oscar, please.
Experiencia de Perú, muy brevemente, буквально.
Now we will continue with the Peruvian experience. Thank you so much. Thank you to the World Bank. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me to be here to share with you the experience of Peru regarding the implementation of IPSAS. At our National Agency for Public Accounting, we are in charge of approving and interpreting the standards published in the country. Since 2002, that is to say for 10 years, we have been incorporating in a gradual manner IPSAS. Also, what has to do with budgetary accrual basis. This has been done since 2005. To date, we have incorporated the set of standards for 2020, including standards number 1 through to 42. These standards have been approved without modifications or amendments. They have been approved just in the way IPSAS has provided them. The main problem we have had is that they have not been correctly applied. The accountants in the public sector are unaware of the application of these standards. Mostly concepts such as reasonable value, accounting estimates, or complex financial calculations. The idea by approving these standards was to try to move as close to them as possible, but it wasn't until 2018 that we include IPSAS 33, and then we identify the necessary technical aspects so as to be able to move forward to IPSAS 33. This is going to allow public entities to prepare statements in agreement with these standards. We wish to have a comprehensive implementation, and in 2020 we started a project at the national level, including all of the entities in the public sector. This excludes, however, state-owned companies. These financial statements are then prepared under the benchmark of IPSAS 33, which is our lesson learned, that it is not enough with passing regulations. You need to provide public entities with the necessary tools and the support of experts to adopt and implement the regulations. We will not have the right implementation if there is no technical support to ensure the implementation. What did we do then so as to be able to have this full implementation? I will briefly mention a few of the main points. First of all, we have generated the implementation of IPSAS at the institutional level, and we have included it as a strategic goal for the state. We have designated human resources who are fully dedicated to this project. We have worked with an external consultant. This plan takes into account landmarks, timelines, a training program for staff. At the same time, we have requested from public entities that they create committees entrusted with carrying out the necessary work at the internal level in coordination with other areas, so that the appropriate decision-making can be there for the necessary accounting adjustments. We have submitted this plan to the Ministry and to Parliament so as to have the input from other authorities that deal with the budget of the state, like the Treasury, for example, and those in charge of procurement. All of the stakeholders need to be part of the process. In line with this, we consider 3 stages: the preparation of the regulations, and then the accounting adjustments, and then the adaptation. Right now we are working on the regulations so as to begin with the accounting depuration process. Then it is important also to have the support of international experts. Maybe our own teams have the necessary technical knowledge, but we believe it is important to have the advice of an experienced technical international consultant. We have received support from a consulting team. This has been very valuable. It has helped us not follow the same path other failed attempts have followed in other countries. As a result, we are undertaking a more effective and orderly approach. Something else I wanted to share with you has to do with involving other key officials at entities and different agencies in the country. This project will only be successful if high-ranking officials at certain public entities are a part of it. This is not a task only for accountants or the accounting departments. We need to have the involvement of those decision makers who are part of the process and of the transactions undertaken by the public sector. Finally, we also believe it to be very important to provide the necessary tools for compliance with the plan. For example, for the process for this accounting depuration, we will create a system that will allow us to receive the information provided by entities throughout the process, with the accounting entry lines, with the amended accounts, and with explanations for the changes made. This will also allow us to do follow-up on the plan and to make the necessary fine-tuning. Likewise, we know there were many attempts to carry out this accounting depuration in previous years so as to give more transparency to the assets and to understand the liabilities, but the expected results were not achieved for several reasons. One of them was that entities did not have the necessary budget to do this, and they had limited resources to carry out this exercise. What did we do then? At the end of 2020, we were able to incorporate in the 2020 budget law an authorization enabling entities to allocate part of their resources so as to fund the implementation of the plan. The idea is that this type of budgetary allocations will be maintained throughout the process until the full implementation is achieved. Finally, and this is a very important issue, it has to do with training plans for officers in the public sector. We have been offering training courses so as to be able to provide international certificates in IPSAS to our staff, so as to become a team where we become trainers of trainers, so that we can continue to strengthen the knowledge base, not only in our team, but also with accountants, because they are the ones who in practice will require that information. In Peru, we have about 2,400 entities that report to the ministry. This includes over 1,400 municipalities. It is then key that while we provide support during the process, we understand that those in charge of those public entities will be the ones responsible, and they will need to understand how the process works. It has been a pleasure to share our experience with you, and I hope this has been useful for all of those countries who have not yet started this process or who are starting this path. Muchísimas gracias.
Overview of the experience of Ukraine and Peru. As usual, we don't have much time left, but I would like to invite Jose and Juan Carlos to facilitate the question and answer part of this session. I think we have a couple of questions on the chat. I don't think we have time for more than 1 or 2 questions, and then we will continue with the closing remark on behalf of the team.
Thank you, Dimitri. Well, let's go to the first question. This is a question from Walter Apaza. He's asking, to what extent do the draft standards that IPSAS board has been issuing in recent months impact implementation processes that are ongoing in countries that are in implementation right now. Not sure if Ian or Andreas want to comment on this.
Perhaps I can give a brief response on that. Thank you, Walter, for the question. Well, I think we have to acknowledge that there is always a transition period of usually 3 years when a new standard is issued. And so during these 3 years, the countries have two options. They can either adopt the new standard or continue with the previous standard. And this decision really depends on what the standard offers. Sometimes it's easier actually going straight to the new standard, and sometimes it's better perhaps to maintain the existing standard and later on, after the 3 years, only transition to the new standard. So it has to be decided in the context of the specific implementation plan.
Thank you very much, Andreas. So we're gonna go to Juan Carlos for the final question. Juan Carlos, the floor is yours.
Yeah, Juan Carlos, sorry, Ian, would you like to jump in? Do you have anything to add? We can't hear you. You're on the screen, but we can't see you or we can't hear you. Maybe you need to reconnect. In the meanwhile, Juan Carlos, let's continue with the second question.
Sure. Thank you, Dimitri. And we received excellent questions from the participants. I will try to actually merge one or two questions that we received from Maria Teresa Agüero and Ramona Batista. Basically, what they are asking is what strategy could be used to convince politicians and top authorities about the advantages of using financial reporting information for decision-making as a complement or an alternative of only using budget information, which is what typically economists use for decision-making. And related to that, to what extent or what the strategies could be used to achieve better harmony between the financial statistic information and IPSAS in order to achieve better results. So I don't know, Andreas, Thomas, Patrice, or even Ian, if he could reconnect, who would like to address these questions. Thank you.
Just a quick comment. I see Ian is coming back. Perhaps Ian wants to jump in first.
No, go ahead, Thomas, because I missed part of the question. I think I anticipate what's going on.
Okay. I think you probably can respond to the second part of the question, which is referring to the alignment between statistical and financial accounting. I think that probably would come best from your side. Strategy regarding convincing politicians about the benefits. I think, yeah, we always talk about the benefits, which sometimes is a little bit complicated to convince somebody of benefits which he doesn't know. We have this discussion here going in Germany all the time, and they say we are quite happy with the information we have, and so we don't really understand the benefits of something additional. I think perhaps we need to approach it from a different perspective and ask the question, are you aware of the risks of making wrong decisions based on incomplete or false information? And I think that speaks very often much more to politicians, which are shying away from having a bad press because of some kind of wrong decisions being made, and being asked the question, did you know kind of the basis of what you're talking about when you made the decision, yes or no? And I think that sometimes that's much more convincing. Thanks.
So Dimitri, if I'm back again now, in terms of the differences between IPSAS and international statistical standards, I mean, clearly, unfortunately, at the moment, there are some, but I think the more that the same chart of accounts is used to collect all information, and either additional information is collected for government finance statistics, or at least there's a bridge, then at least you're clear where there is a difference. Certainly as a board, we are looking to try and reduce the unnecessary differences. And there is an update process for the international statistical standards including GFS and ESA, which has just started and is due to complete in 2025. And we are playing a full part in that. Indeed, we're now an observer on the advisory expert group, which is overseeing that. So we hope that will be an opportunity to reduce differences in some of the recent projects that we've got ongoing. For example, measurement, we hope that that will help in terms of reducing some of those differences further, getting clarity on bases and treatments. So unfortunately, there are differences, but we are working to try and reduce those. But it requires change on both sides, both our sides and also the statistical community.
Thank you, Ian, Thomas. Patrice, Franz, Livia, any final remarks on your end?
Maybe on the benefits, just one small point. Generally, indeed, to convince politicians, you must be credible. And talking of the experience of those who did it already is generally very powerful. And also this is something that we saw in Europe, when some surveys were done among European countries, is that those who already applied accrual accounting with a quite mature, I would say, degree of accrued accounting, really were much more positive about the benefits that the switch to IPSAS-based standards entails on the decision making, and the percentage of those who did it already. And the positive aspects is much higher than those who didn't do it. The expectation about the benefits is lower than those who did it already. So talking to those who already did it probably is a proof that there are benefits in practice, and this probably should be highlighted more.
Thank you. Please mute when you're not talking, Patrice. Franz.
When we're talking about politicians, in my experience, the most helpful group is actually the parliamentarians, because they are the users of the financial statements. They want to be very, very well informed. So if you get in touch with them, either in the coalition or maybe in a position, are eager to be better informed, and maybe individuals, plenary session, or maybe a commission, a PAC. But my recommendation would be to focus on them, really.
Thank you, Franz. Jose, Juan Carlos, I think we have more questions, but unfortunately we are running out of time. So thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much to all speakers. Armand, let's move on with you with the closing remarks.
Thank you, Dmitry. Thank you, all our speakers, participants, event participants. It was a really very interesting event with a lot of useful discussions and thoughts. So I just took a note of a few of those. And still a few key points here is our public sector accounting reform roadmap. It exists under the PULSAR. Please refer to that. That is very relevant. We have heard a lot about political support as a key element for first-time move, lessons learned, including keeping in mind about parliamentarians and supreme audit institutions as key players. Of course, a willingness of stakeholders was also raised as a key element. Another element is agree reform strategy, and not a standalone, but link it to the PAR, public administration reform, PFM reform, and make it very clear on the timeline. This is not a short exercise. This is a multi-year, long-term transformational project, as indicated by speakers. Reform champion is a key, so we need just to have a clear champion. This is not only about accountants, as repetitively mentioned by the speakers and discussants. Coordination and management is needed. Monitoring, reassessment, adjustments, it's an ongoing process. It's not once set up, you will implement for until the end of the reform. Resources are critical. You need to ensure that the costs are funded, including of IT systems, which are very expensive and they need to be planned. We heard about people again. So this is key to be addressed, including continuous training and addressing the people's knowledge just to implement those reforms. Legal and regulatory comes next with policies and processes, use of the new information for decision-making and accountability, even including in the legislation those requirements. and which is also important for internal as well as external users. Structure of the new PSA system, very important. Integration with TFM reforms, including budget, statistical, GFS, performance, those are important. And also a lot of reference to IFMS, so as a key element to operationalize the transition to IPSAS. There was discussions about direct and indirect, at least from our audience. The preference was about indirect adoption, including your experience from Ukraine. It was about phased and big bang. Again, in our discussion, it was more preference for the phased approach, as the countries we saw only New Zealand, at least in the samples, share that adopted big bang approach. The advice was keep it simple, demonstrate quick wins, focus on big ticket items, key asset, liabilities, incomes. Preparation, as it was indicated, it's unlimited. Please spend more time on preparation. Transition, including on the link to the IPSAS vertical, it's 3 years, maximum 3 years. So plan and invest in preparation more. A survey, which Ian just updated us, demonstrated that there is a 6% rise in accrual, in full accrual application worldwide. So now it's 30% accrual and 40% partial accrual, 6% rise during the last 2 years, 3 years. And we also learned about IPSAS approach from Livia and references to their website. So the summary is it can be done, but not an easy task. So we need to properly coordinate, manage, and implement. Dmitry, back to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Arman. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us, for your participation. Please stay safe and have a great rest of the day. See you in our next events.